At 10 years old, she already knew pain more deeply than most adults ever would. Her bare feet had grown used to the rough dirt roads, her tiny hands carried buckets of water bigger than her body, and her eyes reflected a childhood that had never truly existed. While other children ran freely through the fields, laughing out loud, she was chained to chores that stole her right to dream. Inside the makeshift wooden shack, there was no space for games or hugs. Only silence, orders, and the heavy weight of being treated as a burden. Deep down, her desires were simple: to attend school, to learn how to write her own name, to feel the joy of holding a book. But each time she tried to reach for that dream, reality pulled her back. Her childhood was nothing but a daily fight for survival, and her voice, so small, was never heard. The girl woke up every day before sunrise, not to play, not to learn, but to serve. Her frail body swept, cooked, washed, obeyed. With each chore, another piece of her innocence was stolen. By the river, as she scrubbed clothes far too heavy for her small hands, she hid her tears in the flowing water. She cried not just from the hard work, but from the emptiness of never receiving a gesture of affection, a word of encouragement. In that small village, no one saw her pain. She was invisible, a forgotten detail in the machinery of poverty. She grew up believing her life held no value and that she would never have the right to choose her own path. Even so, the girl carried within her a small spark of hope. At night, when the sky filled with stars, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. With a stick, she scribbled words in the dirt, words she had picked up while secretly listening to the school nearby. She wasn't enrolled, but she dreamed of being one day. In those misshapen letters lay a silent scream: "I exist. I want more." But the price of dreaming was high. Every time she was caught trying to learn, she suffered cruel punishments: slaps, scolding, humiliation. What good is reading to a poor girl, they said. What they didn't understand was that each stolen word was, for her, a piece of freedom. Her small body already showed signs of wear: drooping shoulders, calloused hands, tired eyes. But the deepest wound wasn't on her skin. It was in her soul, the certainty that she wasn't loved. When she looked at her reflection in the water, she saw only a dim, lifeless child. She wondered if anyone would ever care about her existence. The laughter of other children felt like mockery, reminding her of everything she couldn't have. She silently carried the pain of being different, of not belonging. But hidden within that silence was resistance, a secret courage she didn't even realize she possessed. That night, the silence at home felt different. There were whispers, stern looks, a heavy air. Lying on the cold floor, hugging her old rag that she pretended was a doll, the girl tried to fall asleep. But one phrase changed everything. Her father, slamming the door, said, "It's decided. Tomorrow we'll speak to him." She didn't know exactly who him was, but her heart began to race. A shiver ran down her spine, as if she already sensed the tragedy ahead. That would be the last night she could cling to childish hope, because from that moment on, her fate would be sealed by a decision that would turn her life into an even darker nightmare. The day broke heavy, as if the sun itself was ashamed to shine on that house. The girl knew something was wrong when her mother didn't call her for the usual chores. Instead, the family gathered around the old wooden table, whispering with serious looks. She stood in the corner trying to understand, until she heard the sentence that shattered what little childhood she had left. "It's better to give her away. We have no other choice," her father said, his voice cold enough to freeze her heart. The reason? Debt, hunger, despair. She wasn't seen as a daughter, but as currency, a child turned into the solution for adult problems. No one asked what she wanted. No one cared about her dreams. Her fate was decided as though she were an object for trade, and within those suffocating walls, her silence was the only answer. Her mother, holding back tears, tried to justify, "It's the best for all of us." But the girl knew it wasn't about love or care. It was about survival. Her life was being sold in exchange for food, for promises of stability, for deals made in the shadows. She was nothing more than a pawn on a cruel chessboard. She looked around, searching for a friendly face, someone who would rise to defend her, but she found only averted gazes and heavy silences. With every word spoken, the knot in her throat grew tighter until her tears became a voiceless despair. The decision was already made, and nothing she said would change it. At that moment, the girl understood her pain didn't matter. The adults were so consumed by their own needs that they couldn't see the violence in their choice. They called it tradition, treated it as normal. But inside her, everything screamed that it was wrong. She was only a child, forced to carry a cross she had never chosen. Fear began to consume her. Every detail of the conversation sounded like a prison sentence. The promises of a secure roof were nothing but excuses to mask cruelty. She didn't want a roof, nor food bought with her body. She wanted freedom. She just wanted to be a child. The cruel decision wasn't born only from misery, but also from cowardice. It was easier to sacrifice a child than to face the reality of hunger. Simpler to throw the weight of survival onto her than to admit the adult's failure. And so the girl was condemned to a fate she would never choose. That night she cried herself to sleep, clutching emptiness. Each sob was a cry for help no one wanted to hear. Her future, already uncertain, now felt like a road with no return. Deep down she sensed it. This agreement wouldn't just be unfair, it would be brutal. The next day the sentence became real. Her father shook hands with a stranger, and her mother lowered her gaze, unable to face her daughter. "It's decided," they repeated as if it were law. The girl, with her heart in pieces, felt the world crumble around her. At that moment, she understood she could trust no one but herself. The blood ties that should have protected her were the first to betray her. And even though she had no strength to fight, something inside refused to surrender completely. It was like a small flame, almost extinguished, but still burning. He was known by everyone in the village. An old man with a worn-out look, a long grey beard, and filthy clothes carrying the stench of the streets. He was nearly 80, and his life had been shaped by misery and abandonment. He slept under awnings, begged for scraps of food, and bore the weight of decades of neglect. To the community, he was nothing but a beggar, an invisible burden wandering without purpose. But behind that fragile image lurked something darker, the sense of power he felt when feeding on others' misfortune. While everyone saw him as pitiful, he smiled in the shadows, knowing that his age and condition were his perfect shield. When he heard about the family's proposal, he didn't hesitate. To him, it didn't matter that she was just a child. He saw it as a prize, a gift that life had finally handed him. The beggar carried stories no one wanted to hear. Some said he once had a family, but was cast out because of his drinking. Others whispered he preyed on vulnerable women in exchange for scraps. The truth was, his life was surrounded by shadows and suspicion. Even so, the community grew used to his presence, like one grows used to a stone in the road. Bothersome, but inevitable. When he learned he would have a wife barely 10 years old, he revealed a twisted smile. It wasn't innocent joy, but the cruel satisfaction of someone who finally felt respected. To him, that marriage wasn't an outrage, but a triumph over the contempt he had always endured. There was no compassion in that man, only self-interest. His old age didn't erase the cunning of someone skilled in manipulation. With syrupy words and false promises, he tried to win over the family, claiming he would take good care of the girl. But his eyes betrayed the truth, desire, and possession. It wasn't protection, it was control. The village, accustomed to his repulsive ways, pretended not to notice. Many thought better him than starving. It was the perfect excuse to wash their hands of the injustice. But deep down, the beggar knew this union would give him something he had always craved, power over someone weaker than himself. The contrast was disturbing. A man at death's edge, worn down by decay, about to be joined to a child who had barely begun to dream. While he saw it as redemption, for her it was a sentence. Their paths crossed not through love, but through the cruelty of a twisted tradition and the greed of those who saw advantage in her misery. For the beggar, that marriage was a trophy, proof that even as an outcast he could still impose his will. For the girl, it was the end of childhood, the beginning of an invisible prison. In that village, the beggar wasn't just a man. He had become a symbol of everything wrong. Impunity, indifference, the filth swept under society's rug. When he shook the girl's father's hand, sealing the deal, he looked proud, as if he had finally beaten life. But what he didn't know was that this gesture also planted the seed of his own downfall. For as untouchable as he seemed in that moment, destiny had prepared a fall as shocking as his sudden rise. In that village, traditions were like invisible chains. Ancient customs imposed themselves as laws even if they crushed the innocent. Child marriage was seen as normal, a legacy no one dared to question. The elders repeated, "It has always been this way. It will always be this way." And so the cycle continued, sacrificing dreams in the name of supposed family honor. For the girl, tradition was a sentence. Her age, her will, her fear, none of it mattered. The simple fact of being a woman was enough for society to push her into an imposed destiny. Silence was the rule, obedience the duty. There was no room for choice, only submission. The neighbors whispered, but no one dared to oppose. "It's their culture," they said, as if culture justified cruelty. The fear of challenging the elders made even the younger ones accept injustice without question. It was easier to bow their heads than to risk being branded as rebels against tradition. And so, the girl was dragged toward a bitter fate, while everyone watched from afar. Tradition, which should protect and guide, had become a weapon. There was no wisdom in that custom, only pain disguised as ancestral heritage. The elders spoke with pride, claiming such marriages strengthened alliances. They said it was for the family, that it guaranteed stability, that it brought respect. But the truth was different. It was about business, bargaining, and convenience. The girl was nothing but currency, and the beggar, a tool in the transaction. The tradition that pretended to be sacred hid selfish interests. There was no spirituality in it, only power. And while the adults recited old proverbs, the child was handed over as a silent sacrifice in the name of false honor. The girl, though too young to fully understand, felt the weight of tradition on her skin. She didn't need explanations to realize they were taking away her right to be a child. The look in the elder's eyes told her, "This is how it must be." And even if she wanted to scream, her voice was swallowed by collective indifference. Every gesture around her reinforced the feeling that fighting was useless. Tradition was like an unscalable wall, far too high for a small girl to break down. All she had left was silence, a silence that burned more than any cruel word. The arranged marriage wasn't just a family decision, it was the reflection of a community's blindness. Everyone repeated the same phrases, everyone justified with the same excuses. And so they perpetuated violence. Tradition became a chain passed from generation to generation, binding the innocent to suffering. But like every chain, it had cracks. All it would take was a single act of courage, one voice daring to defy the system, for the centuries-old weight to begin to crumble. And soon, the girl would discover someone willing to break those chains in her name. The entire village knew. Every neighbor, every shopkeeper, every face that passed along the narrow streets was aware of the tragedy that loomed. But silence ruled, suffocating. It was easier to pretend nothing was happening than to challenge tradition. Some whispered in low voices, gossiping in corners, but none dared to speak up. Fear of retaliation was stronger than compassion for the girl. The community, which should have been her protection, became her accomplice. Every averted gaze, every sealed mouth, every hurried step was another brick in the wall that trapped her. No one dared to break the cycle, and the girl, feeling the weight of those eyes, understood. She couldn't count on anyone. Some neighbors even tried to justify their silence. "It's not our problem," they said. Others, with heavy faces, repeated, "It's their culture." The girl walked through the streets and felt the whispers, but no hands reached out to her. Her suffering was turned into a silent spectacle, watched by an audience that preferred to hide in the shadows of indifference. It was as if her pain wasn't real, as if her life had no value. That collective complicity, fed by fear, only gave more power to the cruel fate forced upon her. Yet there were eyes that betrayed discomfort. Some older women, when crossing paths with the girl, quickly looked away, as if her image was an uncomfortable mirror. They knew it was wrong but lacked the strength to change it. Their silence was a shield against shame, a way to quiet their own conscience. Even among the young, cowardice prevailed. Many dreamed of escaping the village, but few dared to challenge its rules. It was safer to witness injustice than to become its target. The girl felt that silence as a second prison. It wasn't enough to be betrayed by her own family. Now she realized the entire community was handing her over to a cruel fate. Her child's heart, still full of questions, couldn't understand how so many people could see and do nothing. The collective abandonment hurt more than any shouted command. And so loneliness grew inside her like an endless shadow. She was surrounded by people, yet she had never felt so alone. The community's silence was more than omission. It was complicity. Every villager who crossed their arms became part of the chain that bound the girl, and so injustice solidified as truth. But that silence, so heavy and cruel, was about to be broken. An unexpected voice would rise, daring to challenge the chains of fear. Unbeknownst to her, the girl was about to meet someone who would not remain silent in the face of cruelty, and that encounter would change everything. The priest of the small parish was known for his simple routine, and the serene words he spoke during Mass. But that day, when he learned what was about to happen, his face changed. The news of a marriage between a 10-year-old girl and an 80-year-old beggar struck him like a punch to the stomach. His heart, accustomed to consoling pain and guiding paths, was overwhelmed with indignation and shock. He asked himself how the community could accept such an atrocity. How could parents hand over their daughter to such a cruel fate? The indignation grew inside him like an uncontrollable flame. For the first time in years, the priest felt compelled to break the silence. His faith, which preached love and protection for the weak, would not allow him to stand by quietly. That night, alone in his room, the priest knelt before the crucifix and begged for guidance. His thoughts were tangled, his soul in anguish. "Lord, how can I allow innocence to be crushed before my eyes?" he whispered. But instead of easy answers, he felt a heavier weight, the conviction that he had to act. The shock came not only from the marriage itself, but from the coldness with which everyone accepted it as natural. The community's indifference wounded him more than any sin. He knew that if he did nothing, he would be complicit in the crime, and that was a guilt he wasn't willing to bear. When he first met the girl, his heart broke. She, with downcast eyes and slumped shoulders, already seemed to carry the weight of the world. The priest tried to speak with her, but barely received a reply. Her silence spoke louder than words, the silence of someone who had already lost hope. At that moment, his shock turned into purpose. He no longer saw just a child about to be sacrificed. He saw a soul that needed saving, and he decided that this mission would be his, no matter the price he would have to pay. The priest walked through the village streets and noticed something even more disturbing: the complicit silence. People looked away, pretending not to know. It consumed him. "If I don't speak, no one will," he thought. His shock was transforming into burning indignation, and his faith pushed him to confront what many called tradition. To him, no tradition could justify the destruction of a child. It wasn't only a matter of faith, but of humanity, and that conviction grew more unshakable with every passing moment. On the eve of the ceremony, the priest couldn't sleep. He paced back and forth, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that if he stayed silent, the girl would be condemned to suffering. But if he spoke, he could face the wrath of the community, be removed, even expelled. His shock had now become a dilemma. Yet, as he looked once more at the crucifix on his wall, he made his choice. He would not allow such injustice to take place. The priest's shock would turn into action, and his voice would be the first to rise against the chain of silence. The priest knew his choice wouldn't be easy. By deciding to intervene, he risked not only his position in the church, but also his own safety. The community was rigid, and defying tradition was seen as an insult. Yet, inside him, the voice of conscience spoke louder. Protecting the girl was his moral duty. He spent sleepless nights reflecting, weighing pros and cons, until he realized there was no middle ground. Either he fought, or he became complicit. The risk was great. He knew he could be accused of disrespecting faith, of going against ancient customs. But as he looked at the child's innocence, he understood any sacrifice would be worth it. His decision was made. He would confront them all, even if it cost him dearly. Fear was real. The priest imagined the glares of disapproval, the cruel whispers, even the possibility of violence. But what frightened him most was indifference, the thought that everyone could simply turn against him for daring to break the silence. Still, his faith gave him strength. He repeated to himself, "If I don't act, who will?" He began planning his steps in secret. He needed to strike at the right moment in front of everyone, leaving no room for retreat. His decision couldn't be partial. It had to be public, so the injustice would be revealed. It was risky, but it was the only way. There was urgency in every thought the priest had. The wedding was scheduled, and time was against him. With each passing day, the girl was closer to her cruel fate. He knew he couldn't hesitate, because any delay could seal the tragedy forever. The pressure mounted, as if each toll of the church bell was a cruel reminder that he needed to act. The risky decision wasn't just about stopping a ceremony, it was about confronting an entire entrenched culture. The priest understood he could lose everything, but at the same time he felt he would gain something greater: the truth. On the eve of the wedding, the priest gathered his courage. He walked alone to the empty altar, looked at the cross, and took a deep breath. "They can strip me of my title, they can expel me, but they will never force me to silence the truth." These whispered words became his personal vow. He would not be a mere bystander. He would be the shield for that child. With his heart racing, he wrote notes for his sermon. It wouldn't be an ordinary sermon. It would be an accusation. Deep down, he knew his words could forever change the girl's fate, and his own. Dawn came carrying the weight of his decision. The priest rose knowing this day would not be like the others. He would not simply preside over a ceremony, he would confront it. The risk was immense, but his faith was greater. He walked through the village streets with steady steps, though his mind was still full of doubts. Inside him one thought echoed like a hammer: if I fall, let it be fighting for what is right. And so, with courage disguised as calm, he headed toward the moment that would change not only his life, but the story of the entire community. The church was packed. The entire village had come, eager to witness the wedding that many still considered normal. Candles lit the altar, and the girl, dressed in an old makeshift gown, walked slowly with her eyes fixed on the ground. The beggar, sitting arrogantly at the front, wore a proud smile as if he owned everything. The air was tense, unseen, but suffocating. At that moment the priest entered, clad in his cassock but with a different posture. His eyes were steady. His face bore the gravity of someone about to shatter silence. The village didn't know it yet, but this ceremony would never be completed. He wasn't there to bless. It was to defy. The priest began the ceremony, but his words didn't follow the expected script. Instead of blessings, he raised his voice. What is happening here is not a marriage. It is a crime, it is violence, it is the destruction of innocence. Silence fell instantly. Guests looked at each other in shock, unable to believe what they were hearing. The beggar squirmed on the bench, uneasy. The girl's father tried to interrupt, but the priest's voice rose above, strong, steady, unshakable. No God, no law, no tradition can justify the sacrifice of a child. Each word struck like a blow, echoing off the church walls. Whispers began to spread. Some were outraged by the priest's boldness. Others, for the first time, opened their eyes to the cruelty of the situation. The girl's mother wept silently, as if finally realizing the size of the tragedy. But the priest did not back down. He walked to the altar, placed his hand on the girl's shoulder and declared, "She will not be given away, not today, not while I stand here." Those words set the atmosphere ablaze. The beggar rose in fury, shouting that he had a right to the deal, but his voice was drowned out by the growing echoes of indignation among the crowd. The confrontation reached its peak when the priest turned directly to the girl's parents. "You treat her as currency, but she is a daughter, she is life, she is sacred." His voice trembled not with fear but with strength. The father tried to justify himself, speaking of hunger, of debts, but the priest retorted, "Poverty cannot be an excuse for injustice." The silence that followed was broken only by the child's sobs. For the first time, the community's eyes weren't on her as a powerless victim, but as the symbol of the injustice they all sustained. The priest, standing before them all, made his final declaration: "If you accept this marriage, you will all be condemned to carry the guilt. But if you have the courage to break it, today can be the beginning of a new future." The weight of his words fell on everyone, awakening dormant consciences. The beggar, red with rage, stormed out of the church under jeers. The father remained silent, unable to uphold his decision under so many stares. And the girl, still trembling, felt for the first time a thread of hope rising in her heart. The confrontation had changed everything. The impact of the priest's words echoed far beyond the church walls. The initial silence gave way to whispers, and soon those whispers became voices rising against the absurdity. Many who once hid behind tradition began to see the gravity of what they were witnessing. The scandal had awakened dormant consciences. Some women, once silent, wept with indignation, recalling their own hidden pains from the past. Young people exchanged restless glances, as if realizing for the first time that it was possible to defy the system. The reaction began timidly, but grew stronger with each passing second. The beggar, enraged, tried to regain control of the situation. He shouted that he had rights, that he had made an agreement, but his words sounded weak against the rising tide of collective indignation. The once indifferent stares now pierced him with disdain. His power crumbled before the strength of a community that had finally awakened. The girl's father, ashamed, could no longer uphold his decision. The weight of public reproach was heavier than any debt or need. The reaction of the people was clear. They would no longer accept that injustice. It was as if a curtain had fallen from the community's eyes. What once seemed normal now revealed itself as monstrous. Voices rose demanding that it be stopped once and for all. Some men offered help to the family, so they wouldn't use the girl as currency. Other women approached the child, embracing her, as if trying to return a bit of the humanity that had been denied her. The girl, who had always felt alone, finally saw around her faces that didn't radiate indifference but compassion. For the first time, she wasn't just a burden. She was someone worth fighting for. The reaction spread like fire through dry straw. The village, once hidden in silence, now buzzed with heated debates. Some blamed the family, others criticized tradition, and many thanked the priest for having the courage to say what no one dared. The collective indignation was so strong it could no longer be contained. The beggar, once seen as bothersome but tolerated, was now treated as an enemy. His arrogant smile had vanished, replaced by the fear of being expelled from the place that once silently accepted him. The people's voice, once silenced, finally rose, and with it came a new collective awareness, the realization that silence was complicity and that only courage could break the cycle of injustice. The girl was no longer just the victim of a cruel deal. She had become the symbol of the change everyone needed. The priest moved, watched. He knew he would still face consequences, but in that moment he understood he was no longer alone. The people had awakened, and their reaction would be the force that would change the child's destiny forever. The scandal echoed through the village streets. The wedding, which was supposed to be a quiet, imposed ceremony, had turned into a collective rebellion. The beggar, furious and humiliated, tried to demand his rights, but was restrained by men who had once stayed silent before him. His voice, once arrogant, was drowned out by jeers and insults. The people, once complicit, now rejected him mercilessly. The girl, still frightened, felt her heart pounding. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew that for the first time, someone was fighting for her. The priest had broken the chain, and now the awakened community followed, but the ending held an even darker revelation. When confronted, the beggar revealed a secret he had kept for decades. Amid shouts, he confessed he wasn't just a man abandoned by life. He had tried before to prey on other girls in the village. His history of abuse, long buried by silence and shame, exploded like a bomb. The revelation shook the community. What once seemed like just an unfair deal now became a greater scandal. They realized they had nearly handed over a child to a predator. The collective shock turned into rage. The priest, steadfast, declared that the man should be removed immediately. The people, now inflamed, united. Some demanded justice, others called for permanent expulsion. For the first time, the community acted in unison against the evil they had once ignored. The silence had been broken, and with it, impunity. The beggar, now without allies, was driven out of the village under the contemptuous stares once denied him. His arrogance had turned into fear, and that fear was the reflection of the end of his power. The girl was taken in by women from the community. She received hugs she had never felt before, words of affection that had seemed impossible until that day. For the first time, she wasn't seen as currency or a burden, but as a child. Her eyes, once filled with pain, now shone with a spark of hope. The priest watched, knowing his actions would bring consequences. The church might punish him, leaders might accuse him of rebellion, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that a life had been saved, and the spark of change had ignited in every corner of the village. The unexpected ending wasn't just the cancellation of an arranged marriage, it was the birth of a new awareness. The community, once complicit through silence, learned that omission feeds injustice. The girl gained not only her freedom, but also the chance to rewrite her story. And the moral of this story is clear. No tradition, no custom, no excuse should outweigh the dignity of a child. The courage of one can awaken the strength of many. May this example make us reflect on how many injustices we still accept in silence. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this journey of struggle and hope.